very happy to be sharing some thoughts around leading change in challenging times. And I'm just going to say a bit of background about who I am and why I do this work. So my background is in secondary religious education, and I've taught in London and Cambridge. But for the most part of my career, I was just outside Ipswich in Suffolk. Then I joined the local authority, working cross-phase from early years up to Key Stage 5, general school improvement, leading on elements of the strategies, and also with responsibility for religious education. So then I left the local authority about 10 years or so ago, and since then I've been working in schools, talking to pupils, teachers and leaders about learning leadership and the curriculum. And in order to clarify my own thinking, I write some blogs and books, and one or two people have found them helpful. And so my work has been around leadership, learning and the curriculum. That's why I'm happy to share some thoughts with you about leading and change in challenging times. Now, I'm a statistic of one, so it doesn't mean that I am right. I think it's really important that we're prepared to put ideas out there and have them debated and discussed and contested, because I don't think one person has all the answers. So I offer these thoughts to you in the spirit of openness and debate, and it's very interesting when people disagree, because that is how we develop professionally, when we're engaged in robust debate, which is about the work and about the person, not about the person. And so while it's very nice for people to agree, it's actually, I think, a really good thing, as strong, as helpful when people disagree. So I hope there'll be some observations when it comes to the questions and answers at the end of the session. So leading change in challenging times. And I think there's always a sense in which every moment in time feels challenging, but I don't think it's hyperbole at the moment. I think we are in extraordinary times, both nationally, internationally, and then within our sector as well. And so, you know, it is really difficult. It is really tough at the moment. So I'm going to offer a few thoughts that I hope are going to be helpful. And I've got three broad themes and areas that I'm just going to be sharing some thoughts on. The first is I'm going to be making the case for being hopeful, not helpless. And because there can be a tendency when we are in difficult times and when we're supporting colleagues and families in difficult times to feel that there's nothing we can do. And the argument I'll be making is there's always something that we can do, but it must never be at a complete cost to us. We have to keep ourselves safe as well. So I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts on that, and that comes from my work, Hopeful Schools, from a few years ago. The second is some of the elements that I have noticed in schools that are, and leaders who are, you know, managing and leading change well. And then I'm going to finish off by referring to Rosa Beth Moss-Cantor's work and the 6 keys that she talks about. So I'm going to give a bit of background about that and then open it up for discussion. So the first thing to say is got quite a lot of work over the years in terms of hopeful schools and building humane communities. And I think what happens in the sector is that there's a great deal of hopeful schools, building humane communities within the sector, but it's quite often not really articulated. And so I think we often do good work, but we don't always name it. And I think one of the things around leading in challenging and difficult times is naming the strong stuff, the good stuff that is happening. Just letting someone in. Hopeful schools, building humane communities. So why does it matter? Well, I think that naming things and talking about what's working well makes a difference. And that's why I think we need to be quite intentional when we're talking about leading change well in these difficult times. And so it matters because the language of hope and humanity, I think, can help to shift the narrative from doom and gloom and things being absolutely dreadful and they've never been as bad as this, to realizing that we do all have agency, that there is capacity for making things better, you know, no matter where we are in the sector. So I think that, you know, it's important when we're talking about and thinking about leadership, it's actually not just the formal leadership of those in leadership roles in schools or in local authorities or multi-academy trusts or in subject leadership groups, whatever. It's really anyone who is influencing others. And so that means everyone who's working in classrooms, every adult who's working in classrooms, including, I would argue, teaching assistants as well. So the language of hope and humanity, I'm very, very mindful of this. And so when I was working on Hopeful Schools, one of the things I did was to come up with synonyms for humane, and just to make the implicit explicit, the implicit explicit. And what you might want to do is just read that list. I'm not going to read it out loud. And just see if there is one of those attributes that resonates with you. And then you might like to put that in the chat. Thank you, Michael, for being the first. And you've put loving. I'm really pleased to see that, Michael. And I tell you why. It's because I don't think we talk about love enough in the sector. And I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about deep professional love. And what I find really hopeful and amusing is people like Vic Goddard, who I'm sure many of you know, brilliant leader working in Essex. And he talks, and I mean, he's no softie. He talks quite naturally and quite openly about how much he loves his colleagues. He really loves his colleagues. And that is just so powerful. And then you've got people like John Thomsett, putting staff first, and with Johnny, just absolutely great. So we talk about, and it's not about being weak. It's not about being soppy in the least. So I'm really pleased that you kicked off with that. So thank you very much indeed, Michael, grateful to you for that. And so we've got a number of people saying kind, compassionate. No one likes to be considered unkind as a human being. That's a really good point. Yes, sometimes we are, even if we don't mean to be. So that's really interesting, compassionate and forgiving. So thank you for those, for offering those. And the reason I put them in is because I think they need to be part of our discourse. How am I trying to be? What is my intention? And the really essential thing here is that we're not making these positive attributes a sign of weakness. They're actually a sign of strength, I would argue. Okay, so thank you for contributing to that. So I'm going to turn now to some of the elements that I've noticed embed hopefulness rather than helplessness. So some of the elements of these is a professional appreciation. And so, Michael, you sort of kind of started on that by saying, you know, loving, and then others of you saying kind and compassionate and all the rest of it. But I think this idea that what follows from that is that we appreciate our colleagues, and it's an underestimated element of leadership, I believe. And there was a comment on, someone had picked up on Twitter in the last couple of days. Someone had been asked, when was the last time anyone thanked you? And I didn't have time to look at all the responses, but I got the impression that not many people had been thanked recently. And what does it cost to appreciate another colleague? We can always find something that we can say, I really value that. That was really helpful. I just love working with you. I really enjoy working with you. It just goes such a long way. And I think alongside that as well is letting our pupils and students know that we appreciate them. You know, I'm really pleased to have you in my class today, year 9. all you who are members of the awkward squad. But it does go along. So professional appreciation and expressing that, I think, is really important. The ethic of everybody. So when we're thinking about leadership from a hopeful element, it is, are we intentional about including everyone? Or is it just some? And what I'm thinking about here is when I'm visiting schools, I'm thinking, does everyone feel welcome? Does everyone feel welcome? I'm going to touch on that a bit more in a moment, but that some people are not privileged over others. All right, the ethic of everybody matters in this context. And the fact is, it's easier to get on with and to like some people than others. Okay, and so we've got to, I believe we've got to work at that, to say that actually everybody matters, even if I don't naturally chime with everyone. Okay, and linked to this, and it might sound strange, is the notion of hospitality. What I mean by that is linked to that notion of welcome. And I think it's a very deep attribute, and we've all been on the receiving end when we've gone to an organization or we've visited someone personally and socially, that deep sense of you are welcome here. And I think we need to be far more intentional about that when we're thinking about leadership in schools. And again, it comes back to this notion that if we do something naturally, and it is a good thing, I think it benefits from being talked about, not in a boastful way, but asking ourselves the question, does everyone who comes into this school feel welcome? Does everyone who comes into my classroom, do they feel welcome? And particularly the pupils and the parents who might not naturally feel welcomed in many schools, and for whom there might have been a history with parents and extended family where they've not had good experiences of schools. What are we doing to make sure that those people feel that they belong here in this setting, in my classroom, when we're talking about pupils and students? So what I'm trying to do here is tease out the elements that I believe are virtues of leadership, that I do see, that I experience myself. And I also observe when I'm in schools and I'm seeing how parents and families are welcomed into the school as well as the pupils. And I just think there's something important about expressing that and talking about why it is powerful. And then the culture of giving. So there can be a tendency to think in a transactional way that leadership is related to power, that other people need to pay and give towards us if we're in a leadership role, but actually it's the other way around, that we need to be emphasizing you give first and you receive second. And I think there's a particular onus on anyone in a leadership role to be modeling that, giving with no expectation of receiving back. It does come back, but we give it without any expectation. That in an educational context, we have the philosophy of children and young people learning without limits, that we don't put any barriers or I would argue labels on children, and the Learning Without Limits work comes from out of Cambridge University from a number of years ago, led by Susan Hart and her colleagues. We make the assumption that everyone has gifts and talents. We make the assumption that each child that comes into our setting has unique gifts and a contribution to make to our individual classrooms and to the school as a whole. We don't know what a child is capable of until they're given interesting, difficult, demanding things to do, and we help them to get there. So what follows from that, and I'm happy to have this contested, is that we watch our language. We don't talk about children from the point of view of ability, which I think is a deeply flawed concept, deeply problematic. I also think it's dishonest. I'm not saying the people who use the term ability are dishonest, but I think in and of itself, it is dishonest insofar as I cannot talk about someone's potential, their future ability. All I can talk about with any degree of confidence is what they have done up until now, their prior attainment. So if we are leading in this truly wholesome, hopeful way, I think there are certain terms that we need to be very mindful of. And I personally would ban if I ran education across the sector, and that is ability. Talking about children who are low ability or middle ability or high ability, they are very, very flawed concepts. I want every child to have the possibility of learning without limits. And linked to that, that we don't refer to any of our children as being lowers or highers or anything like that, because that is putting a ceiling on some of our children and what they might be capable of. Another thought on leading, hopefully, is to be mindful of the fact we never know the good we do. We never know the good we do. So we're not always going to get feedback in the moment that what we do is helpful. We're doing our best to be kind and inclusive and all the rest of it, but we're not always going to get feedback. But I put it to you, colleagues, that you will have had experience of people, whether it's families or whether it is children, at some point, not in the moment, saying, oh, that really made a difference when you did that. That really made a difference when you did that, Mrs. Mark. That was so helpful. Didn't necessarily realize it at the time. And we're not looking for affirmation the whole time, but I think it's part of leading well is working to principles and thinking, I could be making a difference down the road, not in a heavy duty way, but we don't always get immediate feedback. And so I think related to this is to be very mindful of how we phrase anything to another human being. That we never ever want to damage their self-esteem. We never ever want them to feel as though they're not good enough in any kind of way. So all our language being affirming, even when we've got challenging things to say. So we never know the good we do. And to hold on to that, I think, is really important. Then we don't need to be right all the time. And I think part of leadership is knowing that, we do our best to get things right. But sometimes we either don't know or we get things wrong. Now, unless we're getting things completely wrong absolutely all the time, that is one issue. But most of us are not. We're doing the right things with good intention for most of the time. Occasionally, we're going to get them wrong. And I think it's really important that we don't beat ourselves up for that. And what I've found is that when I've made mistakes and then talked about them, there's a greater degree of connection with the people I'm working with, generally. Can't guarantee it all the time. And it works with pupils and students as well. I've made a mistake, actually. I didn't call that right. So there's a paradox there that we don't need to be right all the time. And when we express that, paradoxically, you get greater buy-in. I I think as leaders need to be very, very mindful of looking after ourselves, feeding the well, because you don't need me to tell you, if you're any kind of leadership role, supporting other people, growing other people, you need to be thinking about, what am I doing to nurture myself as well? Because we can fall into the pattern in leadership of always giving, 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 and we will burn out if we do that. And so it's really important that we are mindful of what it is that provides us with nourishment, intellectual and emotional and psychological, and that's going to be different for each of us. It's not a luxury, to go for a walk. It's not a luxury to read a book. It's not a luxury to meet up with friends. These are actually all essential, just for a good life, but also they're really important in terms of leadership, I would argue. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that hopeful leaders, which is the thread of what I'm talking about, leading in challenging times, is they're very good at articulating the distance traveled. And what I mean by this is that when we're working day by day, there's lots of little things that don't feel as though they amount to much. And what hopeful leaders are able to do is to say to their colleagues, look where we were last term, look where we were a year ago, look how far we've come. And it's so important for each of us to be reminded of that. And I think it's a really strong leadership trait to say to people, I know it feels grim at the moment, we've still got work to do, but look how far we've come. We were exploring this as a potential plan last year, whether it was related to the curriculum or behavior or better connections with our families. And it's not perfect, but look how far we've come. And so that's a big sign for me of leading, hopefully. And then being in the black. And what I mean by being in the black is that it's a bank balance. And so if we do most things with the right intent and with generosity of spirit, what I argue is that we are then in the black as far as goodwill is concerned. It then means that we can draw on that when we need to do something that is tough or contentious. You're going to have far more buy-in from colleagues if there is a residue of goodwill. We can draw on that, which we can't do if we're in the red, if we haven't taken time. And it doesn't take masses of time. A lot of this is about being intentional. It's about being careful in the way that we communicate and share things with people. So I don't think this is heavy duty in terms of time. It's about thinking these sorts of things through. But if we are intentionally trying to get things right for our colleagues and for ourselves as well as part of that, we can say that we're in the black, and that's a really strong place to be. It makes us more resilient when we've got some tough decisions to be made. And so why does this matter then, these elements that I have been sharing with you? Well, the argument I'm making is that these kinds of things are indicators of healthy organizations. And what do I mean by that? Well, where they are paying as much attention to the soft stuff as they do to the hard metrics. So what do I mean by the soft stuff? What I mean is the human elements of leading a group of people, deep respect, trust, kindness, generosity, humanity. Those organizations that pay as much attention to that as they do to the hard metrics are the ones where they tend to thrive, they tend to do well, whether that's in the private sector or in the public sector. And we don't need to look far to see where things go wrong, either in business or in politics or just in the world in general. So this balance I'm arguing, is really, really important. We've got to be careful that we don't just get locked into the soft stuff. We need rigor, we need discipline. But equally, I think too often there's a tendency to focus on the hard metrics, and the hard metrics in business would be how profitable an organization is. What's the bottom line? In the education sector, the hard metrics are the results at any key stage. If you just focus on those and forget about the humanity of it, it's not sustainable. You can raise standards in the short term, but you can't do it in the long term. So what I'm arguing from this is that when we have these kinds of attributes in place, we can then make the claim that our values are lived and they're not just laminated. And this is a great quote from Contender Charlie. We can then say our values are lived and not just laminated. And as a result of working this way, I argue that we are then creating safe spaces where these spaces are characterized by high challenge and low threat. So we want to do things that are difficult. We're a challenge-seeking species, but getting this balance right with the low threat and with the deep humanity of hopeful leadership, I argue means that we can do our best work. And it means that we can take the truth, we can take hard messages and hard feedback, as long as the person who's talking to us is distinguishing the work from the person. So we critique the work, but we leave the human being intact. And it's the same with children. We critique their work, but we let them know that they're okay. And it then means we can truly debate and discuss in our educational context what is right for our pupils and students. But we're only going to do that in a really robust way if we're in settings which are characterized by high challenge and low threat. And what I'm arguing is that behind that, we need these elements of hopeful leadership. Then we can get to a place of radical candor where we critique the work, but we're able to give some strong messages, because it is possible when we have worked in this way and we're intentional about working in this way, it is possible to be both robust and kind. So I'm going to just finish in the last couple of minutes with a few thoughts from Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's work. She is an American academic who's spent the last sort of 4 or 5 decades in Harvard University, where she's a professor, researching the characteristics of successful organizations, whether they're in the public sector, whether they're in the private sector. And so these are some of the characteristics she's found. Obviously, this is a lifetime's work, and these have just been synthesized. So she talks about the first of the characteristics in these organizations is that people show up. Now, they don't just show up physically to do their work. They show up with their complete selves, psychologically, intellectually, emotionally. They're showing up for the work and for their colleagues. That they speak up. Okay, something isn't right, or they see that someone is not being treated properly, they speak up. And I think there's another element to this, is that we encourage others to speak up as well, because everyone has good ideas, everyone has good insights. So let's not just speak up ourselves, let's also make sure that we're encouraging others, that we look up, and that we remind ourselves of why we do this work. Why are we in this profession? So let's revisit our values, our vision on a regular basis in a light touch way. Let's look up and remind ourselves of the importance of the work that we're doing in the sector, that we team up. And it's so much more happens when we're working collegiately and collectively. There's a space and there's a time for working on individual projects, but we saw certainly during the lockdowns what happened when people collaborated and teamed up. Never give up, never give up. And she's got a great way of phrasing this, where she says, it never feels like success in the middle. We're in the middle of a project, we're in the middle of the term, we're in the middle of doing something, it never ever feels successful. But if we hit barriers, what are we doing to regroup, to give ourselves a pause? And if we're on the right, we know that we should be doing this work, how do we refresh and recharge and then continue? But she says never give up, particularly if it's important work we're doing. And then finally, possibly the one that is most important for me is lift others up. Lift others up. One of the most powerful things we can do is to encourage other people, lift others up. So that's number 6. So let's remember, colleagues, that we're human beings first and we're professionals second, that the young people we work with are human beings first, they're learners second. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can get to me through marymyatt.com, and very happy to continue the conversation thereafter. And I hope you found that helpful. Thank you, colleagues.